Following that, our final speaker today will be Dr. Afia Sheherbano-Zia, who is presenting I Am Democracy, the Appeal of Imran Khan's Populism in Pakistani Women. As a reminder, I would like to note that we do Q&A sessions after the completion of the presentations. You can write your questions in the chat box or raise your virtual hand and pose your question in person. And now I'll be leaving the floor to Dr. Susan. Just before that, I'd like to remind you that this panel is recorded. I leave it with you, Dr. Susan.
Thank you, Kainat, and welcome everyone again. I just want to briefly say that I'm tuning in from Australia, from the Bundalang Nation in New South Wales, and I hope you're well wherever you're tuning in from. I'm going to keep this very short. I've attended one of these sessions before, and there was so much content there and so little time for discussion that I'm going to leave it to the experts to talk about Pakistan. I just want to say and start off by saying that Pakistan, as I've heard, has been considered one of the forerunners of the mainstreaming of populism that we've witnessed and continue to witness around the world today. And I think, therefore, that there is so much that scholars of populism can learn from the Pakistani case, and perhaps we haven't in the past learned enough from Pakistan. I'm sure I will learn a lot today. As we know, populism scholarship has been dominated by European, North American, and Latin American studies, and the theoretical and conceptual framework does not neatly fit into other illiberal and authoritarian political contexts. And I think we have seen this when we had this discussion around India, for example. And Pakistan is one such case where populism has such a distinct and complex face. And so because we have 5 speakers today, all of whom have such interesting papers to present, I will just go ahead and hand over to our first speaker, Dr. Samina Yasmeen. So as Kainat has already mentioned, everyone will have 15 minutes, and we will be having a Q&A at the end, as Kainat has proposed. I do suggest everyone to write their questions in the chat, and there might be time after each presentation to also have any pressing questions someone wants to add. At that point, I think we can be flexible around that if we want to be. So I'll hand over. We can see here Dr. Yasmeen's PowerPoint. So I'm going to hand over to you. You're just on mute at the moment, Samina.
Okay, let's see again.
Beautiful.
And I've just lost that.
We can see the second slide, and now we can see the first slide.
First slide. Okay, so I hope you can also hear me now.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Susan and Kainat and everyone else, especially from European Center for Populism Studies. It really is my pleasure to come and join you and talk about something that I've been working on. Unlike other discussions of populism that you may have had, what I'm really going to focus on is how Imran Khan has used the narratives to give a message to people, and therefore has emerged as a populist leader more in the new millennium in a very different form compared to Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in the 1960s. So what I'm going to talk about is basically what do we mean by narratives, and then what Imran Khan's narrative building can be characterized as prior to April 2022, when the vote of no confidence was passed, and since then. But most of my focus would be since April 22, what has happened and what are the outcomes of this narrative. Now, I don't mean to suggest for once that the model that I'm going to show you is in fact totally applicable to Imran Khan. It's a model that I developed during my research on Jamaat-ud-Dawa and Lashkar-e-Toiba, looking at how different groups develop narratives and how they communicate their ideas. But I think the main elements of narratives and how we can see Imran Khan or any other populist leaders' narratives really remain the same. So what I'm going to try and show you in this diagrammatic representation, which really builds on the militant narratives, but please, once again, my qualification that it is not to suggest that Imran Khan is a militant in any way, is that in any case of promoting ideas, whether they are populist or otherwise, there's a very clear relationship between a master narrator who comes up with ideas, his or her audience, and then informal narrators who pick up the ideas from the master narrator, and then they communicate to others as well. And in this whole process, master narrator and also the informal narrators try and distinguish between the current state that people find themselves in, and then they contrast that with the ideal state that they think is important for people to achieve. Sorry, in that movement from current state to the ideal state, they point out that there are a number of obstacles which must be overcome, and that it requires activism and agentic activism on part of the audience. So if you want to reach the ideal state, it is important for the audience to know what the obstacles are and then make sure that they do everything that in fact removes these obstacles so that the ideal state can be achieved. As I said, this is a diagram which could be applied to any other narrative as well. But looking at Pakistan, and I'm sure other speakers would talk about it as well, what we do know is that there's been a whole set of people who have, in one way or another, adopted these populist narratives, either for militant purposes or just to socially mobilize people. What I'm going to talk about is exactly what kind of narrative building Imran Khan, who became the prime minister in 2018, and before that was known for the fact that he had won the World Cup for Pakistan in cricket, what were the main features of his narrative, and exactly how did he go on mobilizing people, and what the impact of that narrative building has been on Pakistan. So I guess where we where we have to start off with is that Imran Khan, when he became a phenomena prior to April 22nd or even 2018, it was made possible due to very active involvement of the military. A lot of literature has come out, even including Imran Khan's own admission, that he was supported by General Bajwa, the chief of army staff at that time, to take up the position of the prime minister. There was quite a lot of help that was provided to him, not just prior to 2018 election, but even before that, dating back to the origins of the party. But if we look at the narratives that he promoted prior to becoming the prime minister and then also becoming the prime minister, whether they're centered around identifying the corrupt political leaders in Pakistan who had denied people the right to live comfortably and live in what he identified as an ideal state of a Medina. In that sense, what he was basically trying to do was to mobilize all the people, claiming that military and the civilian government would be on the same page to change the situation in Pakistan and create a new thinking, a new change, or a tabdili. In that, I think there were lots of promises made, including the fact that, which was very similar to what Ali Bhutto had done, where he talked about roti, kapra, or makan, which is food, clothing, and housing, but he gave it an Islamic color. When he came to power as the prime minister, given the fact that economic conditions weren't very good, and the mismanagement was being noticed by people with increasing inflation, he started including another sense, which was to be strong and not be deterred by the difficulties that people come across, which I think the catchphrase was "Ghabrana nahi." Now, these narratives were really those that told people that they find themselves in a very difficult situation, but they will be able to acquire that state of being in Medina where everything is good, fair, and just, provided they're just careful, they're patient, and they are given to the moves that are being made by the government to change the situation. Now, when April 22nd comes, or in fact, let me go back to that, even prior to that, as it becomes clear that political alignments are being shifted and those groups that had been brought into supporting Imran Khan's PTI, they are beginning to reassess their positions. Imran Khan started talking about a different narrative, and that narrative has really become very clear after he was thrown out of politics, thrown out of power in April 22nd. In fact, I would say that we could even look at 27th of March 22nd. That was the beginning of that narrative. Now, what was the narrative? I think basically his idea, and let me go back to again this, his main idea was that Pakistan finds itself in a very difficult economic situation. Pakistan finds itself in a current state where it is not recognizing its true potential. And the true potential, if I could again refer to the ideal state, would be one where Pakistan as a state for Muslims, or one that was created by Ali Jinnah with a dream for Muslims, it would only be possible to move from this current state to moving to the ideal state if all the obstacles in the way of that movement are removed. So what were the main obstacles? There was this element which I think is common between other Islamist groups and Imran Khan, which was that their Western and other non-Muslim states' agenda that were actually stopping Pakistan from moving in that direction. And in that, what he really identified was that there's a foreign conspiracy, especially by the United States, in which the United States has established an alliance with the local political power brokers. And in that initially, he was very careful. The focus was on the political leadership that had managed to throw him out of power, but then gradually he brought in the military as well. So his main focus in terms of the obstacles has been to identify that the political leadership that has ruled Pakistan so far is corrupt, has really defied any logic, has not followed principles of justice, and in that the military has been party to it. But I think there was a very clear difference in the way the military was identified. There was a mixed message. The military as an institution was being maligned in his narrative and identified as an obstacle, but not military, all the military. So there was this mixture of ideas about the military or generals, but then not the whole military, because that is our military. And then it starts being focused on a few leaders in the military. And in that, General Bajwa became the main target of his attacks. So General Bajwa and his ilk and their machinations were identified as the main issue. But in this, what we see is that it was a very neo-Marxist approach as well, in which he identified that there was a connection built between the United States, the external powers, and local politicians and the military to change the regime, because Imran Khan, under the PTI banner, was moving Pakistan from the current state to an ideal state where Pakistan would have been strong. So effectively, therefore, his main focus on obstacles started talking about these alliances that were built. It's interesting that he gradually also added the judiciary. We could say that initially after the 27th of March, military was identified and then judiciary was identified. But again, there's a mixture in the way Imran Khan identified the judicial role. When the judiciary took decisions against Imran Khan, he identified judiciary as part of the whole system, which was denying people, the youth of Pakistan, the right to have a good Pakistan. But overall, as the decisions were moving in Imran Khan's favor, then the military was presented as some organization, some institution that was going to help Pakistan realize its true potential. So I guess in this whole process, what we find is that Imran Khan tried to use a combination of languages. And when I consciously use this term languages, there was a language of the Western liberal ideas, which is quite acceptable and also available to elite in Pakistan. But there was also a language of Islamism, which is available to the ground, at the ground level to the people. So he combined both the Islamist and the liberal ideas to create this narrative, which he presented to the youth. So depending upon which aspect you were coming from, you found his ideas appealing. So let's go back to then. Who did he ask for agentic activism? I think effectively, while he focused on all Pakistanis, the main focus remained on the youth, 60% of the total population. I could go on, but I know that Kainat is trying to keep everyone to time. So now let me move on to the point as to what did it do to Pakistan? I think before what did it do to Pakistan is answered, we have to accept that Imran Khan, even before he came to power, was supported by some very intelligent Pakistani youth who are very good at using the social media. And they knew how to mobilize support using the digital media, and they also knew how to create narratives that can be taken up by others who would then proliferate the same ideas around the place. This medium, plus the rallies that he held almost every day in different parts of the country, became the space in which he promoted these narratives of the ideal state being denied to Pakistan. Gradually, as I had said already, that moving from military in general, he started targeting General Bajwa and then a few other people, even arguing that they were the masterminds for trying to kill him. But all that shift, both in the physical rallies and on the social media, it contributed a few things in Pakistan. I've consciously identified it as a divided country with a question mark, because I think at one level, his narrative of what Pakistan needs, it needs a just and fair society where everyone's needs are met, that really united people. But at the same time, the way this narrative was communicated, the way people were brought onto this space, also employed language that was not at the level that people had been used to coming from political leaders all the time. He turned that into an art as well. And in that, I would draw comparisons between Imran Khan's style of engaging people and some very hardcore religious militant groups that would use similar imagery, combining local language, ideas, simple ideas, and bringing up a picture that is presented to people. What has been the impact of that? It united people, but it also divided people. We need to look at the social media, just looking at Twitter, for example, and it becomes very clear that those who had picked up their narrative from Imran Khan, they employed the similar tactics and similar ways of berating anyone who didn't share their ideas, and therefore closed off the option of any alternative thinking. I don't want to say that it's only Imran Khan, because Imran Khan's rise to power, Imran Khan's rise to being a populist leader took place within a context in which Pakistan military was trying to manipulate who would come to power in Pakistan, first from the sides and then less from the sides and more openly, despite its claims that it was neutral in the whole process. in that context, Imran Khan's narratives attracted counter-narratives that were supported by groups that did not approve of his narratives, but also those who felt that it would be good for them to identify themselves closely with the military, assuming that military, in fact, was now against Imran Khan, and so therefore would be happy to see this different attitude. And so effectively, I think what we see is that as a result of Imran Khan's narratives, we ended up seeing Pakistani society a lot more divided, very similar to along the lines of what President Trump did in the United States. The level of civility in politics, we could say that it isn't always very high in Pakistan, but it even went further down. So the populism, at least in my understanding, using these narratives of the ideal state and the current state, actually contributed to lessening social cohesion in Pakistan. Another indirect impact of this was, and I think that relates to the implications for Pakistan's future politics or political scene, is that it energized, once again, by dividing the country so much, it energized the military's role as the custodian of law and order. 9th of May attacks, despite all the different interpretations that have been presented by PTI and its opponents, created the space in which the military has reestablished its control. So it is, some people would say it's martial law by another name, but the reality is that we have to accept that where Pakistan is today, it may not have been at that point had it not been those very fiery speeches using very colloquial ideas, mixing it with very modern ideas by Imran Khan in a very beautifully choreographed areas and on social media. Situation probably would have been different. So I guess where I want to finish my presentation, and I'm looking forward to others, is that when we're looking at populism and looking at Imran Khan, we have to accept the fact that his narrative grabbed the attention of most of the youth. But we also have to accept the fact that its narratives has also sown the seeds of division in the country, which under its current environment, it cannot really afford. So what we need really in Pakistan is more of a united approach to how Pakistan's problems can be solved. I hope I've done some contribution, and if not, in any case, I'd look forward to hearing from everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yasmeen. That was wonderful. I have questions myself, but I'll ask anyone if you have any pressing questions at this point to just raise your hand or pop them in the chat or simply unmute yourself. We have time to ask Dr. Yasmeen a question at this point. Any other questions we can add to the Q&A? Yes, we have a question. Go ahead, Bülent.
Dear Yasmeen, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this insightful presentation. My question is that we are aware of that various forms of Islamism and Islamist populism challenge both the establishment and each other in many Muslim countries. Could you elaborate on the specific types of populist Islamism that contend with one another and with the establishment in Pakistan? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I was hoping that I wouldn't go into that because I think other speakers are going to talk about it. But I think looking at the way, from my point of view, the Islamist populist ideas in Pakistan, there's some which Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan presented, which applies to mostly the Barelvi Islam in Pakistan. And again, it did something very similar to what Imran Khan had done, but it was addressing relatively disadvantaged community in Pakistan. And over a period of time, it's expanded its control, but their aim basically is the same in some ways, as what Imran Khan was saying, that you need to create an Islamic state. And in the definition of an Islamic state, they were not really limiting themselves to the state per se, but also state's foreign policy, and also what rules and regulations or legislation is permissible in Pakistan. So that's one kind of Islamist populist narrative that we can see in Pakistan. And then there's obviously, and that's really the research that I was drawing upon, is the populist ideas that have been promoted by very hardcore militant organizations who now are coming into politics gradually, like Jamaat-ud-Dawa and previously Lashkar-e-Toiba. And from their point of view, again supported by directly or indirectly, but some groups in the military, their populist narrative has been that Pakistan needs to be an Islamic state, but Islamic state along Deobandi lines or even Salafi lines, and that once Pakistan becomes an Islamic state, it becomes the place from where jihad in future can be waged. Now that's where the difference comes in. For example, TLP and Jamaat-ud-Dawa is that Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, at least to my knowledge, hasn't talked about expanding the scope of jihad outside Pakistan. But there are groups that talk about Islamic State as the place where then Muslims get together and then they can go and expand the power of Muslims. But these are the two extreme variations. And I guess coming back to what I was talking about, Imran Khan, he implies ideas that can be appealing to all sides. And it can also be very appealing to the liberal sides. But within the militant space and the non-militant Islamist space, I think these are the broad ideas that I could contribute. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If there's any other questions, then I think it would be good at this point to move forward. Dr. Yasmeen has mentioned already social media and how it has affected the dividing of the nation. So I'd like to now introduce our second speaker, Ramsha Jahangir, who's a media professional and researcher who'll be talking about media and populism in Pakistan.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much to the organizers for having this very insightful conversation today. And it's a privilege to be joining such esteemed researchers who've also contributed a lot to my personal research as a journalist and the study that I'll be talking about today. So it's definitely been very insightful already, and I'm looking forward to other presentations as well. Just to give you a little bit perspective on my background and work. So I'm a journalist essentially from Pakistan, and I've been covering PTI and Imran Khan's populism and digital politics for the past 5 to 6 years, mostly since they came into power since this last elections. So a lot of my interventions are journalistic and less academic, but at the same time, curious and inspired by a lot of this coverage and appetite to have these conversations. I did a study last year analyzing Imran Khan's tweets throughout his tenure as a prime minister. So what I did was I analyzed all English language tweets posted on Imran Khan's official Twitter account during his tenure, so from August 18, 2018 until April 10, 2022. And my analysis is based on a total of 1,035 tweets. And like I said, the focus was English language tweets, so I didn't take into account Urdu tweets, which are often just a translation of the English language tweets. And the motivation to do this was, like it's already been mentioned, that a lot of populist research is focused on within the geographical scope of the West. And specifically, my focus was on the communication style and tactics of Imran Khan. So while a lot of your past research has correctly identified Imran Khan as a populist actor, My contribution was focusing more on a communication-centered research on populism. So using a quantitative content analysis, exploring what characteristics of populism are present in Imran Khan's tweets, and how populist is his communication style on Twitter. So it was less an analysis of his politics overall, but more a focus on his communication style, specifically on Twitter. And then also charting how did it evolve over time. Because as I mentioned, the study period looked at his whole tenure. So it was also an attempt to look at if the style changed or evolved in any way during his tenure. So to populist researcher, indicators are not new. I looked at 3 indicators: references to the people, opposition, and exclusion, specifically of dangerous others, to look at how populist's communication style was. And to my own surprise, looking and covering PTI and Imran Khan's social media use over the past years, I found that Imran Khan's Twitter during his time as a prime minister was actually on the side of soft populism. So it was not as high as his politics or rhetoric, political rhetoric is generally. And in terms of, so it was firstly soft populism, and then also he most prominently, there were prominent references to the people in his tweets as compared to other forms of populist messaging, such as targeting the opposition and or excluding dangerous others. So this people focus in Khan's tweets confirms what we call endemic populism, that possesses going public through social media, and that aligns going public through social media that aligns with populist discourse. Interestingly, because I looked towards the end also, right before there were threats, he was feeling the threats that his term would come to an end because of the no confidence vote. The populism level in his tweets was higher compared to the start. So these findings also indicate and are coherent with previous findings that show that soft populism is mostly a communication trait employed by mainstream parties, while moderate or bold populism fits more with the opposition's aims. So this was an interesting finding personally as well, to see sort of this difference in his communication style with changing political circumstances as well. Then specifically, one of the research questions, sub-research questions, was looking at references to people. So how does he reference people? What are some terms that he used to address people as a prime minister on Twitter? There was definitely a lot of nationalist sentiment. Once in power, Khan found appealing to the people meant amplifying nationalist sentiment and deflecting national issues by blaming the enemies, such as India in this case. And it also identified that he addressed people as Pakistanis mostly, a term that represents a nation with shared values, culture, and beliefs. And besides Pakistanis, Khan also spoke on behalf of Muslims and Kashmiris. So his effort to frame a national identity facing a civilization struggle led by nationalism and religious belonging aligns with populist communication of nationalist leaders in similar divisive settings outside the West, such as Israel or Modi in India. Also, Khan's detachment from his political rhetoric in his communication is reflective of how leaders adapt their communication styles on social media. So something we've mentioned is that because PTI is a very youth-centric party, and specifically when using digital media, Khan enjoys support from a very, very tech-savvy PTI, which is a lot of young people. So his focus is more appealing to those sentiments that give a purpose to the youth. And a sense of identity to the youth as well, that combines them and gives them a sole purpose to come together and rally for these causes. In terms of opposition and exclusion, again, contrary to previous work, the study found that Khan rarely used Twitter to target opponents and exclude dangerous groups. So while he rose to popularity being an outsider criticizing the political elite for being corrupt, and not capable of protecting the interests of the people. As a prime minister on Twitter, the study found that he did not prioritize discussing the political elite or media as such. In contrast, his tweets were more prominently criticizing India, and again, the nationalist sentiment that I spoke about. Again, this is something interesting and a very interesting contrast, because covering PTI's social media communication as a journalist, there was always a lot of discussion on how the PTI targets the media on social media, how the PTI is running trends against the opposition and targeting political opponents. So this was sort of an interesting mechanism to see that Khan's official Twitter was being used for official communication. But it was PTI and their connected network and social media messaging that was being used to do a more aggressive style of communication. Moving on to the communication style of Khan, as we've identified in our various studies as well, is that populist communication is often based on factors such as media logic, populist mood, and how a timeline of events influences style and degree of populist communication. So in this case, like I mentioned, towards the start, it was this feeling of connecting with the public as a prime minister, and towards the end, it was more aggressive and trying to establish legitimacy when his office was being threatened. So it was interesting. So I looked at two styles, engaging and intimate, and Khan's overall communication during this time was more engaging, but it was also intimate at the same time. So he leaned on a style based on engaging the people by endorsement of PTI officials, sharing updates about the government's policies, and promoting his own communication as a prime minister. But it was also engaging because, like we know, he's a former cricketer who's won a World Cup. There were often a lot of messages, personal recommendations to the youth on books to read, on Turkish shows to watch, and also on a lot of occasions connecting directly with the social media team and supporters, and acknowledging their contributions and encouraging them to do the same. So that kind of engagement over time was also visible in his communication. So I think the overall findings were coherent with literature, personality politics, and populism. Even when Khan was promoting PTI or his own communication, his style was more informal and conversational, which confirms previous observations on personalization of politics by populist leaders. And this is something we've always seen, that it's often talked about the charismatic style of Khan, Khan's delivery style, even in speeches. So this was also visible on social media. One thing that I would give as a caveat is that, of course, this was an analysis based on his official account. The way social media works is we're not sure if Imran Khan actually posted these tweets himself. So this is purely based on his account. So it's not sure. We're not sure if we can actually attribute this style to him. But that being said, it's still interesting because it was official communication. And the reason I chose Khan's communication style was firstly my familiarity with PTI's social media politics, but also Khan is one of the first prime ministers in Pakistan's context who've actually used Twitter and social media for official communication as a prime minister. Of course, it's not the same anymore because the Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, and now afterwards Twitter and other social media is being used. So it kind of sets a good precedent and a research area for future research to compare how different prime ministers in the Pakistani context, in different environment, political context, are using social media for political communication, and if there are any similarities or differences. So there is definitely a big scope and gap in studies analyzing communication style and tactics in Pakistan's context, but also generally outside the scope of West. So those are the big findings from the study that I'm talking about. The study is called From Streets to Tweets, mapping former Pakistani Prime Minister Khan's communicative strategies on Twitter. But just commenting on what has the aftermath of May and the downfall of PTI been on social media politics in Pakistan. This is less of an academic intervention and more of a journalistic intervention. What we've seen is, so PTI was always ahead of the curve in using digital media for politics, be it divisive politics, be it promoting government updates. It was also known that it was PTI who was so ahead of the curve that even for national security campaigns and setting the agenda for national security, it was PTI during their time in power contributing to a lot of those as well. So their success has been widely acknowledged and taken help from. So there were coalitions, the online coalition between PTI and also the military and other security stakeholders in Pakistan came together and had a successful, what we say, online coalition and a very impactful online narrative game, which was also incredibly divisive. That it's been talked about in terms of media pluralism. It was a big threat because journalists were being targeted. They've run coordinated campaigns against critics. And the space for dissent, the space for critical speech became very saturated in this environment. And what this said was, so now all social media parties, it's PTI may have started it, but it's all social media parties have now kind of jumped on the bandwagon. We haven't seen the same level of sophistication, the same level of impact and mass appeal and scale and scope of social media politics by other social media parties yet. But it's also interesting to see that while what we also saw in May, a lot of the events were being attributed to social media coordination, and a lot of it was aired live on social media platforms, and that has not come without consequences for supporters and activists. So of course there's a censorship element to it as well. But one of the key outcomes that has come out of PTI's communication and use of social media is that it's kind of opened up the space for all sorts of communication and rhetoric to happen. So it can be ugly. It's also opened a new stakeholder. So youth has become more involved in politics, but at the same time, it's also incredibly divisive and dangerous, especially from a media perspective and journalism perspective. So I'm going to end my intervention here, and I'm happy to discuss this further. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramsha. Wonderful. Are there any pressing questions that we'd like to ask Ramsha at this point?
If I may.
Please.
Okay. So my question is related to the role of military in promoting Imran Khan or PTI on the social media and print media and other types of mainstream media. So the question is that all the social media hype was created, or a large proportion of social media hype of Imran Khan and PTI was supported by the military, which has vast resources of personnel and money and threats also and all the things. Now that that support is gone, what do you see the future of PTI? Of course, it will be downscaled, but how much downscaled it will be after the support of military has gone?
That's actually a very good question, because as you must know that a lot of PTI supporters, activists, and members of the social media team were also abducted. Some have disappeared as part of the crackdown following May 9. And with Imran Khan now in jail, of course, there are limitations, and it has been the impact has been felt widespread. The impact is not just only on PTI, but also on social media, the overall social media presence of the state and national campaigns that I'm talking about, because initially when they were in power, a lot of these national campaigns were run together by the military support and also the PTI. So firstly, on a national scale, we've been seeing, for instance, the recent UN General Assembly meetings or some big events that are happening on a global scale. The visibility is not as high as it used to be at that time when both the coalitions were working together. So that's one impact. The other is, of course, this is to say, right now it's a very intimidating environment, but we've still seen that PTI's digital team has broken some social media records, let's say, but be it by hosting a Twitter space, and they're very active on TikTok as well, and using more and more social media platforms and tools to organize and do a very international campaign. So one thing that's very important in their case is that the scope and scale is not just national, but international. So even when all of this happening, PTI was posting hourly updates and testimonials from PTI workers, showing that this is not something you will see on TV. They had support from around the world, including US, UK, Saudi Arabia, also Europe, giving English subtitles to a lot of these speeches. So they've gone all out in trying to communicate to the international audience of what's happening. Of course, if this can be contained or not on a national level, this we are witnessing. But as far as the global reach and digital support is concerned, I think the mobilization is still there. It's just a matter of time and political circumstances.
Thank you.
Well, I might read this question that you left in the chat, unless you want to pose it yourself to Ramsha.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I am curious whether there are any political entities in Pakistan that utilize troll farms or troll armies. Of course, they are paid troll armies on social media, similar to what we observe in many other authoritarian populist countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have written extensively on this, actually done an investigation for Dawn newspaper in Pakistan called #Mills on paid social media armies and trends. So that's of interest. But in short, yes, social media, it's not just PTI, like I said, it's across the board. Different social media parties are using, it's actually not just about troll farms now, because like I said, communication and politics has gone online. So around the world, we see that having digital parties is the new norm. So it's not always a bad idea to have social media support, but in our case, in authoritarian context, especially if we compare to India, BJP's role in dividing the country and passing on nationalist sentiments and campaigns, social media parties have a big part in that. So they're definitely across the board. We were talking about TLP, Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, which also way in the start, even when they emerged as a smaller party compared to mainstream parties, had a lot of coordination and support going on online and mobilizing to run their campaigns, also blasphemy campaigns. So this is definitely across the board, and with elections coming up, we will see, in fact, more mobilization and utilization of troll farms.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ramsha, for a wonderful presentation. We're going to move on to Dr. Fizza Batool, who's going to talk to us about the land of pure Islamic populism in Pakistan's identity project and the rise of radical Islam. Floor is yours.
Thank you. It has often quoted that when Panda talked to the dragon and asked what is important, the journey or the destination, so that reply was to the company. So thank you, ECPS and ADI, for the company that you provided me, for this platform, and for the senior scholars with whom I'm sharing this platform. And I have just a few points to add to the ongoing discussion or conversation we are having, populism present in Pakistan. I see populism from Laplacian lens, and I see it more as a phenomenon, rather a noun, rather as an adjective to define populist parties or leaders. And when I say that I see it as a phenomenon, it really doesn't mean that I do not use populist term in my writings. I do use it. I have compared populism of Imran Khan with populism of Batool. So yes, we all do this. But when I try and see populism more as a phenomenon, I focus more on how we do politics and as a style or as a discursive logic that we apply in politics. So one thing that Laclau introduced was this use of empty signifiers, because almost all definition we have of populism at present, we see populism as people-centric, and the extensive use of the people in populism. So yeah, when populists talk of the people, they use a very ambiguous term without clarifying what they mean by the people. But the people is very centric to democratic discourse, but when populists try and use this term, they try and mix three meanings of the people: demos, ethnos, and plebs. And my focus in this presentation was more on the very nation or ethnos term. And the main prime difference that any nationalist discourse and populist discourse is, although there is an overlap, obviously, but it's mainly in how populists define the nation as a part concept. They focus more on how the populists, how the people are different from some others who are not the people. And when nationalists talk of the nation or ethnos, they try and employ a whole concept and focus more on what the nation is. When I started writing on populism in Pakistan, like many other authors, I had this view that our nationalist movement, Pakistan movement, it was purely nationalist movement, and there were some hues, some colors of populism in them, in the discourse, but mainly it was focused on Muslims being a minority group, and it was more transformative. It was more focused on creating a new state, and there was much lesser focus on populist discourses. But now, after reading more and populism and Pakistani politics as well, I have started seeing some very strong markers that shows that Pakistani movement from the very start, from the very inception, it had populist colors. And in this particular presentation, I'm specifically focusing on Pakistan, the term we chose for country. In fact, I'm sure most of you will already know this, when India insisted on, when Gandhi insisted on keeping India as a name for India, Jinnah had issues, and Jinnah wanted to call India as Hindustan as opposed to Pakistan. And this term, this Pakistan, it means the land of the pure. So religious moralism was embedded in the very name of the country. And if you go through the pamphlet that Chaudhry Rahmat Ali wrote to introduce this name, he actually suggested 3 separate Muslim states and 3 separate names. So for us, the current territory of Pakistan, it was Pakistan, the land of the pure. Then for Bengal, he suggested the name of Bange Islam. And for Hyderabad, Deccan, he suggested that it should be named Usmanism. So, in all 3 names, you can see some use of religiosity or religious conceptualization of nationalism. And since we were the very first to try and mix the concept of modern nation state with this religious conceptualization of nationalism. Nation in itself is a very ambiguous term, and it's a political construct, and we give it meaning. When we try and came up with a new conceptualization of nationalism, we actually made it even more ambiguous. We added even more ambiguity to what we're trying to achieve through this religious nationalist state. Is it for the whole ummah? Is it the whole concept of the nation, or is it a part concept of the nation? And if you go through the discourse of the earliest political actors we had in the Pakistan movement, the emphasis was mainly on the part concept of Muslim of subcontinent being separate nation and different from Hindus of the subcontinent. So it was defined in a very populist fashion of we being different from them. And so we need to have a separate state. And that was fine until the creation of Pakistan. The important at that time was to come up with the whole concept of nation, at least after creation of Pakistan. But we continued with the part concept, and we continued pitting Muslims against the evil Indians and evil Hindus living in India. And so in the very Kashmir movement, we continued with this populist discourse, the way we controlled jihad and the way we involved the people against another country. It was, the whole discourse is very populist. It continued implying Muslims being different from Hindus and being pure. And so this antagonism and this moralism, these two addition that we did to the idea of Pakistan as a state, it continued throughout our political history, and we kept on coming up with new definitions of what being a Pakistani is. And since there was so much ambiguity, since there was so much antagonism and moralism embedded in our conceptualization of identity and our conceptualization of being a Pakistani, all political parties, either religious or liberal or moderate, they had their own concept of what being a pure Pakistani mean. So there was this debate at the level of the state, the elected and the non-elected regime, because we had a long history of dictatorial regimes. Each dictatorial regime came up with its own conceptualization of what being a pure Pakistani or a good Pakistani mean. And this purity kept on, because it's being an empty signifier, because it has no clear meaning. You can come up with all new meanings, and kept on debating what this is. And so Dr. Yasmeen has already covered, have talked about it, so I won't go into much detail, but even the religious radical movements we have here, Jamaat-e-Dawah, TTP, and the religious radical parties we have, TLP, they all try and justify their movements and their political parties as being trying to have the real Pakistan as was perceived. So try to purify Pakistan, so purify the land of the pure as it should be. And their understanding, their conceptualization of what the pure is obviously different. So for TLP, for instance, if you go through the tweets, social media posts of the TLP, it constantly target PTI when it was in government. And obviously the targeting was around this saying that the Riyasat-e-Medina, the concept Imran Khan is giving, it's not it's just a facade, it's just something on face. And in reality, the real Riyasat in Medina, we are the ones to give, because we are the religious people and he is not. And again, if you, even in liberal parties, even if you go through the discourse of very liberal political actors like the People's Party, even they employ this concept of Islam, and they try, and they're not saying that Pakistan should be a secular state. They're actually trying to say that Pakistan should have their version of Islam, moderate Islam or Sufi-based Islam. So I'm not delving much into how on these differences. My main point is that if this populist discourse lies at the very name of your country, trying to find a solution perhaps is you'd have to try and reconceptualize, or you'd have to try and come up with new constructs of what Pakistaniyat means, or what Pakistan's identity really means. And we'd have to try and employ the whole concept of nation, if we want to continue using the religious contours of nationalism. We'll have to move towards the whole concept, because that whole concept comes with a pluralist foundation. It comes with this idea that at the global scale, there will be multiple other nations, and all these nations will have their own political rights. So first, we really need to have a whole concept. We need to redefine being a Pakistani from a civic or from a sense of a citizenship, or as a demos, rather as a ethno pitting against another ethnicity or a religion. So that's it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Batool. Right on time as well. Is there anyone who wants to ask a question? We have a time for one question at this point. Otherwise, we'll move on. We'll leave that question for the Q&A, I think, Willem. So we might just move on to our next speaker. We have Dr. Raja Ali Salim speaking about military and populism in Pakistan. All yours. We can see that beautifully. You are muted at this point.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, so my presentation is on military and populism. As you can see on the screen, so the outline of this presentation is that I will talk a little bit about the globally, what is the role of military and populism in the historical sense, and then I will talk about the role of populism and military in the history of Pakistan, and then I will talk, of course, about Imran Khan. So military and populism. So there are two types of, we can foresee two types of links between populism and military. One is that the military generals, the coup leaders, directly become populists, and they rule, by populist rhetoric, populist actions. And the other is that military supports the populist leaders back from backstage. So indirectly, they promote populism or oppose populism. So if we look at the populist generals, mostly this phase of military and populism interaction is mainly from the 30s to 60s, and mostly these, they were the heydays of socialism in the newly independent colonial, previously colonized countries. So we can give examples of Jan Perón, of Argentina, Cardenas from Mexico, Nasser from Egypt, and Sankara from Burkina Faso. Perhaps the only right-wing populism was only for a few years in Greece, where we see the regime of colonels. So these are in this phase of military and interaction with populism, generals themselves become populist and use the populism to promote their governments and to demonize others. The other phase which we see is that military opposes or supports populism from backstage. So we have examples of support of populist dictators like Vargas from Brazil, and opposing of dictators like Aston Saro of Bolivia by the Bolivian military. So if we look at the changes in military, we see that military, when these newly independent countries, military was part of the middle class. It was kind of a modernizing force in the post-colonial societies. So they had better education than most of their people. They have more scientific knowledge. They had regular interaction with the other militaries. So they wanted to change. They want to revolutionize. They wanted to get their people, developed, move their economies, and to reach the stage where people are living, the best of their, best part of their lives. But from the 1970s onward, we see that militaries in the post-colonized countries have become a force of status quo. So they have been part of elite. And they are no longer in, their priority is not to revolutionize or change their country. Their priority now is to rule. So there are no grand visions, and we see this change from, if we compare in Egypt from Nasser to Sadat, in Pakistan from Ayub to Zia, and in Burkina Faso from Sankara to Compaoré. So we've changed from the revolutionary stage to more status quo phase. Now we come to Pakistan. So in Pakistan, populism was limited mostly to the eastern part in the initial phase of our history. And as all of you know, that from 1947 to 1971, Bangladesh was part of Pakistan. It was called the Eastern Wing, or East Pakistan. So most of the populist leaders were coming from the eastern part. There was the Fazle Haq, the Maulana Bashani, and some would also, include Mujibur Rahman, who was the founder of Bangladesh. In West Pakistan, or the current Pakistan, Bhutto was, we can say, the first populist leader. And if you look at the history of Pakistan, all of these, populists were opposed by the Pakistan military. And this goes on from 1950s to 1970s. After 1970s, we see a change, that there is a realignment forces, and military embraces the right wing populist leaders, which are not very popular, like Jamaat-e-Islami, Maududi, or Mian Tufail, but they are, military uses them to disrupt politics, to delegitimize democratic or popular politicians. So if you look at the 1990s, the Jamaat-e-Islami gradually, moves, whenever there is, military wants to change the democratic government, they use this religious leaders to change to create a law and order situation and change the government or force the government to resign or ask the president to get the government out of power. Now we come to Imran Khan. So Imran Khan's populism was a game changer. Before Imran Khan, military used this money or threat of violence to get popular electables. So electables are people who are popular in their own constituencies. Mostly they are feudal lords. So what military previously used before the in the 20th century, what Pakistani military used to do was to force these electables to join the party they want to win. So they will provide money as well as these popular candidates, popular elected leaders to join the party they want. So once there was this IGI and military gave billions of rupees to different political leaders, middle level political leaders to join them. And then it changed its support to PPP and then again IGI or Muslim League. So this happens. So that was their main way to operate. Populist rhetoric was not a major component, except when they supported some newspapers or newspaper columnists. But by 2010, military understood the importance of media and social media. And they knew that if they want to intervene indirectly, they need the help of print media, mainstream media, as well as social media. And this probably came from what happened after 9/11. So after 9/11 and the invasion of Afghanistan, there were daily briefings to a cohort of national and international journalists by the military leadership. And they would, brief them what is happening. And this change continued, and military became more and more accustomed or familiarized with the social media and the traditional media. So, and we see rise of ISPR, which is the Inter-Services Public Relations, which is the media form of the military. So from an obscure post, nobody knew the name of the DG ISPR, Director General ISPR. It became one of the most important posts in the Pakistani military, controlling several radio stations, TV channels, and dictating almost the whole media. And it was called the fifth generation war. So it was said that they are, war of weapons and war of enemies, and then there's the war of narratives. So what army is not only responsible for fighting with weapons, Pakistan army is also responsible for fighting the narratives against Pakistan. So we see that colleges and university students are troll farms are made by the Pakistan military. Students from universities or colleges hired, and they are guided for months, trained, and then they they go back, and they are so ideologically socialized that they become tools of Pakistani military. And then there are also plays and songs and books and movies and Twitter and Facebook. So Pakistani military embraced the social media. Imran Khan was in politics from 1997, but when Imran Khan was adopted by the Pakistani military, it was not like the previous adoption of political leaders by the military, which has been going on from the 1950s. So that adoption was, Pakistan military chose Nawaz Sharif or Benazir as the lesser of two evils. But here, when Imran Khan came onto scene, or when the military decided to use it, he became the one and only anointed one. So he was not like the lesser of two evils. He was the one who would save Pakistan, who will take, revolutionize Pakistan, who will build a new Pakistan. So there was this rhetoric that there is an old Pakistan before Imran Khan, and there is a new Pakistan. So there is a dividing line where Pakistan changed, and that dividing line was Imran Khan. So the 2018 elections were rigged, and pre-election period, and then on the election day, and judiciary was also encouraged by the military to embrace IK. And then when Imran Khan was the prime minister, there was this one-page rhetoric that Imran Khan is the only prime minister where is, the military is so much, they are, there is no daylight between the two, the military and the Imran Khan. So everyone is one page, and there is, previously civilians were saying something other, and Pakistan military was saying something else. That phase has gone. Now there is one leader, and he is deciding. But then, of course, as it happens, there were many differences between Imran Khan and the military, and it was the military which decided to step back and allow the other political parties to gobble together, or at least, or some say, help them to destroy or take Imran Khan out of power. So, and then we also now see abductions, court cases, threats, harassment of families of IK party leadership. So there is, now the military, especially after 9th May, when the PTI supporters, Imran Khan supporters, attacked military headquarters in Rawalpindi, also the Corps Commander residence in Lahore and other areas. So after that, there is totally, there's a messy divorce between the military and Imran Khan. And while the military is successful in, destroying the PTI, it is also facing an unprecedented backlash on social media, mostly from overseas Pakistanis, but also from inside. So this is something which is very new for military, because it was never criticized openly as it has been criticized now. So the conclusion is that for the first time in the history of Pakistan, the military is divided. So military usually, whatever the line, the general headquarters, GHQ, or the chief of army staff took, everyone in the military supported him. And everyone, even the retired military families, also supported. But now things have changed. Because of the populist rhetoric which military helped fashion, and the troll farms and the social media presence which military paid and trained and did everything, now that same troll farms and same trained people are acting against it. So what we see that it will be very difficult for the military in Pakistan to support any other populist politician in the near future. Military thought that it could control Imran Khan's populism, but it is IK that now controls a large section of the military as well as retired military families. So this is what has changed because of Imran Khan, because of the populist rhetoric of Imran Khan. Overall conclusion is that populist leaders, unlike the traditional politicians, cannot be useful mules or tools for the military or other powerful establishment groups because of the very nature of populists and populism. So the charisma and narcissism and the nature of cults on which populism is based, populist leaders never become good followers. So if the military or some other powerful groups thinks that they can control populists, they will see what they can see what is happening in Pakistan. So another example which you see in the US is also not exactly similar, but you can see the same dynamics that Trump and Republican Party or Fox News or Murdoch, where Trump the Republican Party establishment promoted Trump from early 2000s or from 2010 onwards, and they thought that he is a useful idiot which they can use it, but eventually they realized that it's Trump which has hijacked the political party, Republican Party, and the old families and the old guard of Republican Party is now thrown out. Similar is the case we see in Modi's case, where Advani and old BJP was using Modi, and they thought that we can use Modi and to gain more power. But in the end, what happened was that Modi became the leader and they sidelined the old BJP establishment as well as Advani. So thank you. This is my presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Salim. I propose that we move onwards so that we have enough time and brain power to have our Q&A. So I'd like to introduce, if she's ready, Dr. Afia Shabano-Sia for the final presentation, entitled I Am Democracy, the Appeal of Imran Khan Populism for Pakistani Women. And Dr. Zia, you did mention that you were going to change your internet connection. Have you done that already, or do you need some time?
No, I don't need any time. What I'll do is I'll do it while they're showing the video. I think the organizers have that ready. So thank you for the time, and to the organizers and also to the other speakers. They've covered so much ground that it's really very helpful. I have compiled a few images with a friend, Umar Aziz, that supports some of the themes that I want to discuss. They don't have subtitles or translation, but I don't think that's required. I'll explain and I'll discuss these after the video, if that's okay.
खान साहब, आप तो प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस करके चले गए हैं, लेकिन हमारे दिल अब तक लरज रहे हैं। मतलब आपने कैसे सोच लिया कि हम ये बर्दाश्त कर सकते हैं? खान साहब, हमें आपकी जिंदगी चाहिए, हमें आप चाहिए। हमारे हाथ जोड़े आपके सामने, इन माओ बहनों बेटियों के, प्लीज हमें आपकी जिंदगी चाहिए।
ये हम गुनाहगार औरतें हैं जो अहले जब्बा की तमकिनत से न रोब खाएं, न जान बेचें, न सर झुकाएं, न हाथ जोड़ें।
हम गुनहगार औरतें जो सच का परचम उठाकर चली हैं, तो झूठ की शाहराहें आती मिली हैं कि हर एक दहलीज पर सजाओं की दास्तानें रखी मिली हैं। जो बोल सकती थी वो ज़बानें कटी मिली हैं।
ये हम गुनहगार औरतें हैं कि जिनके जिस्मों की फसल बेचें जो लोग, वो सरफराज ठहरे, नियाबते इम्तियाज ठहरे, वो दावरे अहले साज ठहरे।
ये हम गुनहगार औरतें हैं कि अब ताक़ुब में रात भी आए तो ये आंखें नहीं बुझेंगी कि अब जो दीवार गिर चुकी है उसे उठाने की जिद न करना।
जो मैं कर सकता था मैंने किया है। मैंने किसी पे एहसान नहीं किया। अल्लाह ने दिया मुझे, इतना ज्यादा मेरी जिम्मेदारी थी कि मैं अपनी कौम के लिए कुछ करूं।
ऐ मेरी ज़मीं अफसोस नहीं जो तेरे लिए 100 दर्द सहे, महफूज रहे तेरी आन सदा, चाहे जान मेरी ये रहे ना रहे।
गोलियां खाने के बाद वो बंदा जिस तरह से आया सामने और वो तकलीफ में, लेकिन जैसे ही वो अपने वर्कर्स की तरफ देखते हैं तो वो मुस्कुराते हैं और वो हाथ हिलाते हैं और उसके बाद वो मुक्के का निशान बनाते हैं। ये होता है लीडर।
तेरी मिट्टी में मिल जावा गुल बन के मैं खिल जावा, इतनी सी है दिल की आरज़ू।
अस्सलाम वालेकुम, मैं माया हैदर जर्मनी से। हम यहाँ आज जर्मनी में पाकिस्तान एम्बेसी के सामने प्रोटेस्ट करते हैं जो खान साहब को इन्होंने अरेस्ट किया हुआ है, उनकी जो अरेस्ट है इलीगल, उसके खिलाफ।
हमें इमरान खान वापिस चाहिए, हमें नहीं इनको डीजल हमारा सदर बनेगा। हमें शर्म आएगी कि सबको कहते कि डीजल हमारा सदर है।
मेरी अपनी राय के मुताबिक एज अ डॉक्टर, क्योंकि मेरी अपनी साइंस वहाँ फेल हो जाती है जाके, कि आप किसी को हिप्नोटाइज कर लें, फिर आप उसको मैग्नेटाइज कर लें और फिर उसको मैस्मराइज कर दें।
Okay, so the reason I didn't use the subtitles is to give a sense of, I think viewers can get a sense of the images and the kind of emotive reaction that the Imran Khan followings have. There are three themes that are illustrated in this clip that I want to flag. First is Khan's appeal to women as grounded in Muslim morality or akhlaqiyat, and piety as the tool to deliver his promissory of welfare and freedoms that he promises not from patriarchy for these women, but from a broader, more all-encompassing and very colonial concept of ghulami or slavery from Western imperialism. And his promises are not for temporal emancipation or for feminist equality, but for heavenly ends. The second theme are the tropes of victimhood and the competitive sovereign subject, which feature in all the rescue narratives that Imran Khan offers and other speakers have mentioned. His revisionist ideal of Riyasat-e-Medina or the state of Medina appeals to the nostalgia that Pakistani Muslims harbor for the classical period of Islam as an equal, rights-based, democratic era that was corrupted later by patriarchal misinterpretations, by colonialism, by modernity. And what this does is it promises the rescue of the post-colonial subject and a promise to return to his authentic, virtuous native self, which involves liberation from the current influences of infidels or Bollywood film culture, or all the evils that Imran Khan himself has summarized as, quote, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And of course, from the lurking designs of regime change by the United States, which is a constant threat. And the gendered significance here is that women serve as symbols that preserve, but also actually reproduce the nation. So their bodies and their gendered roles have to be controlled and also protected from occupation, from invasion, which includes the influences of Western ideas, Western dress, aspirations. And this explains Khan's warnings against feminism and what he calls culturally alien women's marches or the Aurat marches, which promote the Me Too movement in Pakistan. And the third theme that I'm concerned with is the realm of political magical realism, right? Myth making, icons, rumors, black magic, and of course his own sex appeal as celebrity, sportsman Imran Khan. And all of these, I argue, have implications for women, but they also offer opportunities to strategize for strengthening civilian democracy over military hegemony and for improving gender relations and for promoting feminist ends. So I'll just quickly go over some of these three themes in some detail with regard to the clip. On piety populism, the earlier images in the clip of the weeping women, so the women supporters and the members of Imran Khan's party, they are all in mourning, both in Pakistan and in diaspora, because Khan has been voted out of parliament in April 2022. And historically, we know that no democratically elected prime minister has managed to complete term in parliament. But this reaction of feminine despair, and even after, and especially after his incarceration in jail last month, it is now televised and selfie promoted. So it does have a very different performative value and impact than prior times. It's also important to point out that female pious sentimentality or what is now called affect and agency, has played a critical role, not just in the routine recruitment of the soldiers for the Pakistani military services, which Maria Rashid's work documents, but even as Samina mentioned, in radical Islamist outfits like Lashkar-e-Tayyiba, the agency of mothers is mined to sacrifice their sons for the cause of jihad in Kashmir, as Farhad Haq's work has shown. Similarly, the dignity of being an actor in their own and in the community's development was the fundamental reason that in 2005, Pakistani women in Swat became supporters of the Taliban commander Fazlullah, and they even funded his crusade for Sharia by donating cash and jewelry. And in his fiery broadcasts, radio broadcasts, for which Fazlullah earned the nickname Mullah FM, he preached Sharia justice by speaking to the women directly. And he was even rumored to have encouraged the women to observe sex strikes until their men acquiesced to support the Taliban commander. And of course, later, these women who had defied the men in their homes regretted the betrayal by the Taliban, but momentarily, he enabled them political autonomy by interrupting local routine patriarchies. And we also saw this script play out in 2007, when the radical women of the Jamia Hafsa Madrasa, which is linked to the Red Mosque in Islamabad, the Lal Masjid, became very political. These women were carrying out moral crusades against immorality in the streets and in the neighborhoods of the capital city to save the nation's virtue, and they continue today to exercise their pious agency and embody virtue to rebuild the Islamic nation and to prevent it from becoming depraved. And similarly, so too on this arc are the women supporters of Khan's PTI party, which are seen in the video, who are publicly performing and even narrating feminist and revolutionary poetry for their male leader, who is, by all definitions, a conservative leader. And so this links with the second theme associated with the populist, which is that of victimhood and martyrdom. The two strongest emotions invoked in the narrations of all the women I've mentioned are grief and the forfeiture or sacrifice of feminine desires for the larger political cause. And I too am not comparing the ideologies of the Islamists with the electoral party of the PTI, but I'm just flagging how the warden of the Jamia Hafsa, Hassan, and her female students continue to narrate graphic stories about the atmosphere of death and destruction inside the mosque during Operation Silence, which was when the state led an armed siege to close down the mosque and the madrasa, which was suspected for harboring Taliban and IS terrorists. Many of these women subsequently appeared on television to mobilize sympathy and get support through their stories of grief. And this strategy of truth-telling and invocation of gendered tropes, what it did is countered the official state narrative and was immensely successful in doing so. And I'm arguing the same is the case with the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf and Imran Khan as well. In the video that we played, we hear women abusing and sloganeering against the former chief of army staff for conspiring against Imran Khan's government. This is sacrilegious in Pakistan. And we see images of them raging at the gates of military offices. This is radical revolt in Pakistan. We even see the act of the woman throwing her dupatta or her scarf at the police. This is an act of defiance. And although some of the still images have been AI generated, which is also interesting, but this doesn't take away from the radical gender defiance that is exhibited in that moment of tearing down the establishment, which is part of the populist schema. Now, there's been some denial and dismissal of these women for the PTI women supporters for their non-feminist or their conservative politics. But Khan's masculine appeal is to women who have been denied or disinterested in franchise earlier. Many of them are debutantes, and they can now assert their political judgment and sense of belonging. Some of the women that I have interviewed, they cite how they feel like a family and they feel safe in the gatherings, in the PTI gatherings, and they do stress, nearly most of them do stress on how Khan's following is an educated one. I think that's an important theme. There's also the issue of sovereignty. I think, it's a long-standing, the other speakers have mentioned this anxiety over civilian leaders compromising Pakistan's sovereignty. That's a constant suspicion held by the military state, from Fatma Jinnah to Benazir Bhutto. And I would say to all non-Punjabi leaders are considered irredeemable traitors, really. There's also been recent textual examples like the Memo Gate issue, which was when the Pakistan People's Party government was pressurized to write a letter to the Swiss banks asking for financial information about their leaders. We also know about the cipher that Imran Khan waved to the public as proof of regime change conspiracy by the United States, and how he's labeled the opposition government as the treacherous imported government, right? So all these catchy slogans and meme games have clearly backfired onto the military establishment when Imran Khan lost their support, because he began to weaponize the references of traitors borrowed from Islamic history against the opposition leaders. And as mentioned, he's also mocked the generals as neutrals, which also carries some sexual innuendo, I would say, and this reference to one of them being Dirty Harry, and a whole plethora of pop cultural common metaphors, which have really effectively become part of the colloquial. And the third theme I want to mention is on his iconic and masculine appeal for women. I don't think we can get away from this. But at the same time, arguably, Imran Khan has mobilized more women than any other leader into political and public spaces, certainly urban middle class ones. And this expansion and legitimizing of women's freedom of expression and political agency does bear weight now, because we know how Imran Khan's removal from the Prime Minister's office triggered political argumentation and intra-family disputes quite publicly on social media and within and amongst veteran military families also. So several women supporters of all ages, from the elite and middle-class military backgrounds as well, have graduated now as frontline activists, and some are serving time in jail for their activism. Some of the women respondents that I have interviewed refer to their own sisters and family members who are supporters of Khan's opposing parties, including other women politicians, in very derogatory terms, and with great suspicion that they are siding with the military, their military collaborators, and how Maryam Nawaz is orchestrating the continued incarceration of the PTI women. We also heard the overseas Pakistani woman in the video who's despairing of the possibility that the Jamiyat Ulema Islam leader Fazlur Rahman, who is mocked as Diesel, could become our president and shame the nation. When I do ask them about it, comments on the looks and masculinity and the sex appeal of Imran Khan by women supporters is often denied. And his very clearly conservative and sexist reasonings about gender roles and prescribed dress codes are fiercely defended, right? And what's interesting is that this is successful because this is a defense offered by women qua women, right? They justify his logic and they argue that his words are twisted and taken out of context. The wide variation of his marital choices is also defended. There's a lot of sanitization about how there is no harassment at his public events, that he is very protective of women, how even UNICEF and feminists say pornography and vulgarity encourages violence against women. So if Imran Khan says so, why do the liberals, or libtards as they are called, pounce on his words, right? And after the attack and the arson of the Corps Commander House in Lahore on the 9th of May, there were lots of rumors that the PTI women supporters were being detained by law enforcement and subjected to sexual harassment or sexual assault. And they are now getting stigmatized by their communities as being non-marriageable, right? The fact-finding missions that were held by the government and human rights organizations found this to be untrue, but Imran Khan himself caused panic by repeating these rumors in his broadcasts, right? Now, interestingly, many PTI supporters otherwise refute the notion that custodial sexual crimes are a regular state practice against women. But when a PTI male senator claimed sexual assault by law enforcement, he was believed as more credible than any woman survivors who speak out on assaults and who are part of the Me Too cause that Imran Khan dispels as alien. I also want to mention one of Khan's former women ministers who was seen in the video, who has turned approver against him after 9th of May. She says, if you notice, Imran Khan was hypnotized, mesmerized, and magnetized by his veiled mystic wife, right? Now, this throws up an interesting dilemma because on the one hand, we have the liberals who insist that commentary on Imran Khan's private life or on Bushra Imran, her piety, his wife's piety, is not permissible, as if the personal is not political. On the other hand, the only agency that conservatives afford Bushra Imran is of her as a witch doctor of kinds, right? And more importantly, these terms, magnetic, hypnotic, are usually used to describe the populist leader himself. But in this case, it is reserved for his wife and her influence on him. There are many articulate, even Western educated, upper middle class women who defend Imran Khan as the misunderstood, progressive, post-colonial, balanced Homo Islamicus, right? His simplicity and lack of extravagance are seen as great virtues like Ahmadinejad and Erdogan. Khan's, I argue, has been an emotional governance rather than an intellectual one. And I've also been thinking about comparatives with Benazir Bhutto's populist appeal to women of Pakistan. She was the first woman prime minister of the Muslim world. She was the same generation as Khan. But her following was from an elite liberal left intelligentsia, and she held working class appeal as well. Many of the followers were from the generation of General Ziaul Haq's children of dictatorship, while Imran Khan's appeal is to the middle classes and a newly conscientized liberal elite, and broadly, I would say, are General Musharraf's children, the lifestyle liberals who consider all other constituency-type politicians to be dirty, deal-making, corrupt, transactional, uneducated, immoral, and even impious. Also, for Imran Khan's followers, the echo effect amongst women seems to be filtered through a patriarch, either the father or the in-laws, or in defiance of them. With Benazir Bhutto, it was far more so identification or empathy as women and a kind of a gendered identification. Benazir Bhutto is idolized very much as the martyr and the victim of the military, but I think Imran Khan is competing for more sympathy and defense from and by women. So what are the implications for democracy? 2 points. First, Imran Khan's style and performance and image as a non-extravagant, simple living man is admired. One woman said to me that other leaders have these mansions and he can easily sleep on the floor. So when I pointed out that Imran Khan does in fact have a big house on an exclusive hilltop enclave, she said, but that's inherited wealth. Now, this is really interesting. He is a populist, unlike most other populists, current populists, who is of the landed elite, but the generational wealth factor qualifies him to the category of the late 19th, early 20th century concept of the Ashrafia, or the Indian Muslim nobility or professional sort of aristocracy almost, who were part of the Pakistan movement. And so in the clip I show of the image of him with Jinnah and Iqbal sort of just hanging out casually with them, it's very much part of this trope of the elite Oxbridge leadership that is imagining a Muslim, continuing to imagine a Muslim homeland. And the second point about democracy I want to argue is that after Imran Khan's governance, liberal democracy is no longer defined as rights-based, but it is being redefined by the Homo Islamicus. Since the events of 9/11, very influential work by post-secularists, Pakistani post-secularists, has anchored Muslim identity around the concept of piety. Piety has been propped as the authentic post-colonial affect of the poor and middle-class Muslim masses, and even as an alternative to both violent Islamic politics and to Western democracy, Western human rights, liberal ideologies. And anyone who questions this, especially feminists, are relegated as Orientalists or Enlightenment dupes. And this is the exact pivot of Imran Khan's objection to khuni or bloodthirsty liberals, these Westoxified, Enlightenment-duped, secular-seeking brown sahibs and family-destroying feminists are framed from the moral perch of virtue-seeking Muslim piety politics, which is definitely not benign. Imran Khan and his current Sufi pious wife represent the full turn of the politics of piety that has been brewing in the Muslim intellectual world for the last 20 years, and it has now found a home in the populism commanded by Imran Khan, the celebrity prime minister. So in conclusion, I've noticed that most of the panels in this series have connected current populism to the far right and to radicalism. My argument is that Khan's populism actually co-opts liberal ideals and even segments of the elites themselves and drifts or drags these to the right, not to just decenter, but to virtually close the already slim gap between the right and the left in Pakistan. And I'm going to stop there, Susan.
Thank you very much, and such a wonderful point to end on, and I think such a great point to start our discussion with. I think that requires some further exploration, and I'm sure the other panelists would agree. So we have about 12 minutes, so not a lot, but I'm sure enough to stimulate some further discussion. So I'd like to invite anyone to either unmute yourself and pose your question to anyone in particular or the panel as a whole. Write it in the chat or raise your hand. So the floor is open. Fizza, go ahead.
I was wondering, when you were talking female supporters of PTI, were able feminist after feminist, if we can, and they were intentional to themes in their, or was it to be hired?
I was having some troubles hearing Fizza well. Did anyone else have these troubles? Yeah, okay. I think we had some connection issues there coming from your end there, Fizza. I'm sorry. Do you want to try again, or if I can, you're gonna put it in the chat? Yeah, okay. I'll read it out. I'll read it out later. I'm sorry about that. Kainat, did you want to pose your question?
Yeah, so thank you everyone for such an enlightening panel discussion. I think my one of my questions is directly for Dr. Zia right now. So I'm like curious, when you were interviewing PTI supporters who were women, how do they explain the behavior or treatment of the party and the leadership itself towards women from the opposition? So for example, their blatant attacks on a maybe female journalist who opposed them, or you sort of explained how they dismiss Aurat March and similar initiatives, but Maryam Nawaz and all other all other women who are categorized as the populist others. So how did these women respond to or just try to justify Khan and the party's behavior towards the opposite side, or the women who are part of the others?
Thanks, Kainat. I wrote your question down because I can't see Dr. Zia in the room at the moment. So she may have changed to her less workable internet connection. So if she comes back, we can pose this question to her, inshallah. Dr. Samina Yasmeen, you have a question.
It was less of a question and more of a comment. I don't know if I actually agree with Dr. Zia in the sense that she says that Imran Khan has pulled the leftist into towards the right wing or conservative side, because I think, at least, and I'd love to hear others' point of view, I think the secret of Imran's popularity and his success in being such a populist leader is that he says to his audience what appeals to them. So he uses internet both in terms of ordinary people who may have very limited knowledge, but then he also uses it for people who are more grounded in maybe liberal thinking. And in that, he combines even his rallies, if we look at it, they would stop during the time when there is azan, a call to prayer, as a sign of respect to the religious identity. He starts, or he would start his presentations with reciting verses from Quran. To you we worship and we seek your assistance. He wouldn't go to the next one to say, please guide me to the right path, but that's where he would stop. And I think if you put it together, I think there's a very clear attempt to tap into the religious, but also tap into the liberal thinking, and then use it to present a very all-accepting personality. And again, I don't want to be too critical, but I think in the research that I've done on Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jamaat-e-Dawa, it's a clear example that over a period of time, the groups realized that they had to appeal to both the English-speaking and the Urdu-speaking audience. And I think he's already moved from there further up. So it was just a contribution that I thought I'd like to make.
Thank you, Dr. Yasmeen. We lost you there for a moment, Dr. Zia. And I don't know if you heard the start of Dr. Yasmeen's intervention there.
Unfortunately, I missed it. I'm just reconnecting. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So to wrap it up, if I can do it any justice, is Dr. Yasmeen was pointing to, I guess, the nuance of the liberal pool being merged with a sort of piety and a religiosity. So in a way, discussing this idea of a hijacking of liberalism, if I wrap that up correctly. And then also we have two other questions for you in the meantime. I'm going to post them to you together because they're quite related. So we have Dr. Batool asking in the chat if the female supporter of PTI can identify being a feminist, so an Islamic version of feminism. And I'll ask this question from Kainat as well. How do the women who you've spoken to, how do they explain or respond to the leadership, the female leadership, or women from the opposition? So just those two questions, and then I'll come to the other questions in the room.
Yep. So very quickly, with regard, I think the second question is more troubling in the sense that a lot of the awkward questions or the awkwardness of Imran Khan's sexism or conservatism, where they are clearly non-feminist in their response. Other women or women from other political parties are vilified, demonized, treated as men, almost, on the same level, suspect. Their being a woman has no appeal necessarily for some of the followers that I've spoken to. The first question is a little tougher to answer because we're not, we're saying, yes, they're a party, they're followers, they are, sometimes they even call a cult, but obviously they're not. I mean, clearly as academics, we cannot lump them as that, and neither is that my interest. So some do identify as feminist. But the troubling part is sort of becoming spokespersons for, to sort of become apologists for Imran Khan's non-feminist, clearly non-feminist perspective. And that's, but I keep saying, I think that's also the moment of or point of opportunity. Critique can be, if it is more nuanced, they will be, I think, more open and have a harder time responding to the kind of feminist critique that is being aimed at the leadership itself.
Thank you. And I saw a hand before that has now disappeared from Dr. Ali, but we have a couple of other hands. If Dr. Ali, you want to pose your question now or later?
Later, maybe, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Then I'd like to move to Ayas.
Hello, hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for this lovely presentation. I've learned a lot. I've been actually investigating PTI narratives as well, especially in the sense that how populist movements in Pakistan have been influenced by media liberalization since 2000. And what I want to propose to the panel today is a comparison between Aurat March, which is Pakistan's Me Too flagship Me Too movement, and its discursive and its symbolic and its use of the internet and the media to create conversations for a feminist constituency, and the PTI party, which is not really a party as such, but is a party in many sense because of the fact that it uses those similar strategies, those mediated strategies that effectively uses social media, mainstream media, and is able to create a constituency of its own within the Pakistani society, pointing to the fact that how politics in Pakistan has changed because of the rise of these new kinds of identitarian leftist movements, whereas a movement of a much larger constituency of a national character is PTI. Unprecedented, of course, as many of the panelists themselves have cited, and charting a new course in the way politics in Pakistan will now be done, irrespective of the fact, however we categorize PTI as left or right or whatsoever. So I was wondering if anyone can comment on this observation of mine. Thank you.
Any
Maybe
volunteers?
Ramsha wants to take this one. Great question.
Looks like you've asked a question nobody knows how to answer.
No, I was
Or
wondering,
maybe
because
well,
can you not, Ramsha?
Susan, can I try? I don't know whether I would succeed or not, because I was trying to work out the parameters of your question when you asked anyone to answer. All I can say is that, yes, PTI is not a party, just a party. In fact, it's more dilapidated now than it was pre-9th of May. But it's an idea. It's a sense of identity. So you don't have to be part of the party, but you can still be very strongly supporting it, to the extent of what Afia was saying, that the families get divided. The level at which you talk to each other, it's very different. Now, has that shifted Pakistan? Yes, it's given Pakistan, those who subscribe to his ideas, it's given them an identity, a mission, what they want to do. But I think we need to really think about it and say, is that sense of mission based on reality? Or is it cooked up ideas, which, frankly speaking, some are really valid and others have just been brought in, put together, and as I said, really tailored to the needs of the audience as and when it arises. That hodgepodge, which I often jokingly say, seems very similar to my cooking, that I throw everything in and then hope that something would come out. In this case, he's managed to get something good. I think what it creates the danger of is that it creates a public narrative by those who identify as PTI supporters, which is not totally based in reality. It gives them the right to refuse any collaboration if it isn't on their terms. And so therefore it prevents them from really participating in Pakistan's shift towards a better state. It also creates similar dynamics as we have seen in the United States, where one side says it's black and the other one side says it's white, and nobody explores the possibility of the gray areas. I think that's a dangerous thing. So if it is pushing Pakistan into a different space, I think we need, as analysts, we need to be very careful that it's pushing Pakistan into a risky space. I don't know if that feeds into what you were saying, but that's all what I could think of.
No, certainly it does. And it does raise alarm bells to the kind of wild narrative-driven politics that we are witnessing. But I also want to, yeah, sorry, I don't want to.
So I was just going to quickly, just a little caution actually, that I did not mean to imply, and I certainly don't hold that that the PTI is not a political party. You know, I wouldn't agree with that assertion or that notion. We can say that it, and I think it's also a little false to compare a civil society movement to a political party, right? I mean, there's a bit of a false comparison over there. So it's not, first of all, it's not easy to break into a two-party dominant managed to do. With or without the military's help, we know what the history of other political parties has been with regard to military collaboration either, and still is. So we can't cleanse the other parties of this influence or this support or this propping. So I don't mean to imply that PTI is not a political party. What I'm saying is that its ideology is so fluid, and as Samina is also saying, is so fluid that it enables it to sort of wrap itself, and that may be its success. You know, that may indeed be its electoral success. So how much do we judge a party beyond its electoral success? At least to that extent, it is a political party. Now, it may not be one that we want to vote for. I'm not crazy about the other parties either. So I'm just saying a little bit of caution in terms of dismissing it as a party, just the same way that the state has done as well, right? We need to be a little cautious on that.
Sorry, can I come into that, Susan? I don't think the debate should be about whether it's a party or not. I think it's a dilapidated party because it was propped up by the military and there's still in a core. But the support level is a lot more than even other parties that have a larger inner core. So in that sense, it's very different. But I think we need to think about the grounds on which the narratives that are underpinning that support and their validity and the risk, and also possibility that PTI can change its narratives. You know, it's the US prompting and then it's US not prompting. So at one level, I think it would create more confusion in Pakistan. It already has, but I'm not saying that other political parties haven't done that.
Can I chip in quickly for a few seconds? Wouldn't you argue, Professor Samina, that the kind of dangers that we, or what we classify as dangers about the PTI is actually exactly those radical anti-status quo or status quo shaking impulses that are just the need of the hour at a time when the status quo in Pakistan has been unchanged since at least 1970s. So what if it comes at the back of a party that has manifestly conservative leanings? I would argue that, in fact, the fact that you have a vehicle that appeals as much to progressive Pakistanis as it does to supporters of Tehreek-e-Labbaik should be celebrated, because it is sort of a mainstreaming of those extremist voices, just like, for instance, People's Party is a vehicle to mainstream ethno-nationalist militants and separatist movements.
Am I allowed to answer that? It seems like I'm the one, I don't know why I'm supporting.
Very briefly.
I don't think it's a question of celebration, because I think the fact that the party is promoting, when it was where it was and now, the idea of which Imran Khan in one of his things talked about jihad, that is getting people into a space which maybe destabilizing. And I take your point, revolutions can sometimes be very good. But I think where my problem is that in promoting those ideas, he has not given people a vision to say, you change, where do you go from here? What would be the elements of the new state? I get actually worried when I hear his statements where he said, Amir, the rich man, oppresses everyone or is very corrupt and doesn't get punished, but a poor man steals a car or a cow and is punished. Yes, there's an inequality. But if you think about the hidden meaning, what it's saying is it is okay until the system changes to do that. It could be taken like that. I think that's risky. So I'm all for popular movements. And I think we have to accept that Imran Khan managed to do that. But we need to look at it as a political phenomenon and see where it could lead to. Would it take us to a positive space, or are there lots of risks that could derail the whole popular movement? And I see lots of risks in there.
Thank you, Dr. Yasmeen. And I'd like to move on to Ali, who has had his hand up for a while.
Oh, okay. So I agree that, of course, PTI is a party, because this is what happens, that usually when the military sport moves away or military is against a party, it's very, existence is questioned. So it's a political party. It runs in the elections. So it's the basic, criteria of what a political party is. It has a manifesto, so it's all there. But again, what I differ here is that this kind of support military gave to political parties, and it has been giving different political party support since the 70s or before, in the 60s and 50s too. So it's completely different what Imran Khan received. So the kind of money, the kind of support. So as I explained in my presentation, there was this lesser of two evils. So all politicians are bad. The idea was, the narrative of military was that all politicians are bad. They are all corrupt. They don't think of Pakistan. They are only interested in their own agendas, own acquisition of money, power. And this has gone, they supported Nawaz Sharif, they supported, for a time, maybe, they accepted Bhutto also, they accepted Benazir Bhutto also. What changed here is that Imran Khan was not the lesser of two evils. Imran Khan was the only leader which can take Pakistan out of this rut, out of this abyss, to somewhere, big, great and beautiful. So make Pakistan great again, something like that. So this is the difference. So we can't equate the support of military to other parties to what Imran Khan has, has got. And this is clear. That is why we see that even the military is divided. So previously military was, military families, retired military families, serving military soldiers were okay. They were with the military, and they, they supported one or the other as the GHQ decided, General Headquarters decided. But in this case, even the rhetoric was so clear and so forceful that even now when the General Headquarters, the chief is distancing away from Imran Khan and saying he is not good for Pakistan, the military families and military are with them. So there is the difference between the two. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. And I'd like to move on to Ali Saldouk. You have a question.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentations. Just a quick question. I was wondering about the legacy of Zia-ul Haq in terms of the relationship between the military and Islamist populism. Was he the first military leader who used Islamist populism, or Islamist populism was there since the beginning of Pakistan? Thank you.
Do you have anyone in particular who you'd like to answer this question?
I think it's linked to what I was presenting. At least in my opinion, and at least in my presentation, I think that populist discourse has been very much part of the nationalist movement that we ran, and then it continued throughout our politics. In both the state and the non-state actors used this narrative, and they kept on defining the pure Pakistani, the pure Muslim Pakistani in a very Islamist meaning against the corrupt Pakistani and the non-Pakistani. So this is not, and since obviously, because I do not connect populism as an adjective to a political party, I see it as more as a phenomena, how politics is being done. So I think that the way we did politics throughout our existence, throughout these 70 years, we did use populism a lot.
Thank you, Fizza. I'm aware that we're over time. I do have two more questions in the chat. At least I want to give Omar a chance to ask his question because he hasn't had a chance to write it in the chat. And then we'll see how everyone's feeling for time afterwards. So please, Omar.
Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. So my question to the panel at large, and specifically to Dr. Salim, is that we have seen within the literature on populism studies that that the literature talks about political leaders being populist, or we have talked about political parties being populist. But within the context of Pakistan, we have seen how institutions such as the judiciary, such as the military, depicting populism. So perhaps my question is to the panel at large, that can institutions be populist, such as the judiciary, such as the military, or is this something that's there for the political parties or the political leaders?
So should
Dr.
I? Okay.
Doctor, please go ahead.
Okay. So institutions, it depends on how you define populism. So, but I think populism is basically a disruptor. So when we talk about populist leaders and populist parties, they say that, we are right, we are with the people, and all the others are wrong. And we basically, they try to imagine something new, which is, cut off from the past, at least from the immediate past. And they pose themselves as the only one. When you talk about in the institutions, it's very difficult for them to be populist. There, for example, individuals can be populist. So we had, many populist chief justices of Pakistan. So you have these 3, 4, one after another, who, starting from Iftikhar Chaudhry, that, they try to be always in the news. They always try to pose themselves as the one and only, and who is going to save Pakistan and from all the other, whether it's military, whether it's bureaucracy, whether it's other politicians. So I would say that institutions, it's difficult for the institution because institutions are, they survive, within a constitution, within something which is bigger than them. And so for them to, be populist, it will mean that they are denying their own existence, because these or at least, they are trying that we have to have a major overhaul of the whole system. So I would argue that it will be difficult for institutions to become populist. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. And if I can pose 2 more questions to you, I'll try and combine them. These are both in the chat. What role do you think leftist political groups and intellectuals play in the context of this populist Islamist saga? And would it be correct to say that Pakistan has never had a populist military leader? So could you comment to those 2 questions?
Okay, maybe the second question first. So I would agree that there hasn't been a populist military leader, and when the Imran Khan is posed as someone who, who changes things and who try to build a new Pakistan. The first question which comes into my mind is that Pakistan has a hybrid, and even during Imran Khan's heydays, it was again a hybrid regime. So the military, importance of military, and after being ousted, he said that I was being dictated by the General Bajwa. So in that sense, I would argue that if there is a populist military leader, who would he, what is the change is going to lead? Because the major problem or the major, defender of the status quo is in Pakistan is the military. So if a new future general comes in and he says that I'm going to, change this dynamic, that military is not going to now be part of politics or the biggest, political party in Pakistan, then of course I will assume that, he can be, in a real sense of the word, populist. Otherwise, he's just one of run of the mill. He has, because he has come with a new agenda. He speaks in a different language and all that. But in the end, there is no change. The second question is about leftists. Leftists since as I talked in my presentation, there was in the heydays of 50s, 60s, and 70s, there were populist leaders who were, at least in the East Pakistan, they were very popular, and they were, and then Bhutto also tried to bring in socialist policies. Whether we can call him leftist or not, it's difficult to say. But since then, and it has happened in, the Muslim world all over the Muslim world, that gradually leftist has, popularity of leftist parties, and leftist leader has gone down, and they are replaced by the rightist or the right wing. So the major challenger of the status quo now is the right wing, not the the leftists in Pakistan and in many other countries. So currently, if you see, there are many leftist parties, but they don't play much role, because the poor or the lower strata of the society, which was supposed to, which is being, marginalized more and more, and which is difficult to survive for them. They don't look towards left to guide them or to lead them to something else. So their ideal, because of this narrative, Islamist narrative or Islamism, their narratives, their solution is also going to the heaven, or looking at politicians who speak in the Islamic language, not in the leftist language, not in the socialist language. So leftists don't play much role, and I don't think they will play much role in the near future also in Pakistan or many other countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. And I think we can have a discussion for another hour. This has been such a constructive discussion, and it only gets to show how much there is to say. We are 20 minutes over time, so I think we have to wrap it up for the people who are late at night already. So thank you all for, these wonderful presentations, and for all the audience members being so engaged. And thank you, Ayaz, for putting in a link in the chat to your recent work, I believe. Yeah, I think we've just discussed so much. We've discussed military populism, endemic digital populism, to piety populism, and I can see now that there's many different faces to populism in Pakistan, but one single face has become very sort of pronounced through all these presentations. And yeah, I'll say just a couple of words about each presentation just to kind of finalize things, and then I'll hand over to Kainat for any sort of closing remarks. But thank you, Dr. Samina Yasmeen, for your discussion and intervention on the master narrative of Imran Khan, focusing on the Islamist representation of an ideal state, one which you argue Pakistan has been denied. So this theft or loss of an ideal state is something that we see in other populisms around the world, and begs the question of what makes these ideal states so successful in mobilizing people around a counter-hegemonic project, whether it's their content, an Islamic state, or the means of opposition and negation. And I think this is what's been covered in the discussion as well. And thank you, Ramsha Jahangir, for your research, presenting your research on digital populism in Imran Khan's social media communication and his changing communication style with a focus on engaging and intimate styles. And also your research highlighting the ambivalent and fluid nature of political communication in an age where populism is combined with social media. And using a discursive lens, Dr. Fizza Batool argues that religious purity is embedded in the name of Pakistan. So with the name and the act of naming being a political act from a Laclauian approach, Dr. Batool's presentation invites us to rethink what it means to be a Pakistani and its antagonistic potential. Dr. Ali, his intervention examined the changing and ambivalent relationship between populism and the military being cooperative and disruptive at different times, arguing the relationship is ultimately unstable and limited. And then finally, we had the beautiful presentation from Dr. Zia showing us the footage of women's performativity of populism. And Dr. Zia discussed Imran Khan's success in mobilizing women around themes of piety, victimhood and martyrdom and sovereignty. So thank you all once again, and I'm just handing over to Kainat for any closing remarks.
Well, dear distinguished panelists, thank you so much for these very insightful presentations. And Susan, thank you so much for the great moderation. Just on a closing note, dear attendees, you enriched the panel with your questions and remarks. And to all the people present here, please mark your calendars for the next session, which will take place on the 26th of November at 10 a.m. Central European Time. This time, the different aspects and varieties of populism and authoritarianism in Malaysia and Singapore will be covered. Please remember to register, and I wish you all a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. We can go now, right?
Yes.
All right. All the best. Thank you very much for including us.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.